Hi, I'm Jesse Randall, MSU FBIC. I'm here with Colter Lubben with the DNR today. There's been a lot of talk about concentrated feeding and baiting of deer. We're on this same property that we just showed how to do a tree planting for wildlife. And I invited Colter out to talk a little bit about concentrated feeding versus food plots. And then how would a new landowner go about going into a site that was recently cut over because of a blowdown, and to start the conversation about how do we actually mark out a food plot? How do we look at getting the stumps out? How do we, or what is the DNR's rotation that they use on their own ground to start a food plot? And so Colter, thanks for coming out.
Yeah, so like Jesse said, my name is Colter Lubben. I'm a wildlife technician for the Michigan DNR out of the Escanaba Customer Service Center. And in that position, I manage parts of Delta and Menominee County, or all of Menominee County and part of Delta County for wildlife management. And part of our intensive wildlife management program, our food plots or openings, it doesn't really matter what you call them, but in the sake of deer hunters and grouse hunters, a lot of times it's just kind of what the markets call them, what medias call them, is food plots. And we have, across our ground, we have quite a few food plots. And when people ask me, why do you do food plots? Like, why is the state putting in money, putting in time, my time, our resources? And there's really two reasons, at least myself, as a wildlife manager, why I feel it's important. One is just, I'll first hit on recreational opportunity. Let's be honest in that food plots have been used for years, and they've really, in the last 10, 15 years, been used more and more and more for hunters to attract deer, to attract other wildlife for viewing pleasure, and then for effectiveness of hunting. But I think that the second is this baiting and feeding ban. And right now we're in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Currently we have no baiting or feeding ban, but there is something going to our commission, our Natural Resource Commission, and that's going to be a proposal to have baiting and feeding banned, and we're actually in the center of that area. And that's no new thing. That's happening across the country. Where they find CWD, where there's a threat of chronic wasting disease, there's a baiting and feeding ban. And in these upper north woods, we're kind of on the northern range weather-wise of white-tailed deer habitat. We get lots of snow, really cold winters, long winters, go deep into the spring. So feeding, which is typically done outside of a typical deer season, feeding, they call it supplemental feeding, it was to supplement the diet of white-tailed deer in the wintertime. So the big thing that people talk about is winter feeding. What are the deer going to eat in the winter? And of course that's an important thing. Timber harvests are very important in that process. But I think what some people don't necessarily talk about or just don't have the knowledge of what can happen is in the spring. So in the spring, you're like, oh, the snow's gone. Like, everything should be great, the deer are good to go. Well, the problem is that everything's still dead. It's still, there's like 2-3 weeks to a month sometimes, depending on the cold temperatures like this year, where there's no green, except for in areas of farm fields, on road edges, and then food plots.
So we're out here, and this site has some topography to it. It's got a long, kind of a very rich moraine that was put here during glaciation. And we've come just off the top of that, and Colter, what I did is I went through with a diverse mixture of oak trees, and I created a kind of a long linear line just off the ridge top. So there's probably 4 to 5 feet until you get to that ridge top. One, to have the deer feel that they're protected, yep. That they can't be seen from the road or from the open area. My goal then is to create a long, narrow corridor where they feel safe to walk, and that it's going to provide mass crops. So there's a mix of our red oak species, there's a mix of our white oak species, and by doing that, I know I'm going to have years where acorns or oak trees don't really bear a lot of nuts. And so I've tried to hedge my bets by planting a diverse mixture of trees so that I will at least have some species bearing acorns periodically each year. And then if you look over, I've got a fairly level area And then I'm going to drop down again into more of a lowland. I had originally thought about putting my food plot down there, but with all the rain that we've had, it pretty much became evident that it's going to be really wet down there. And so I've actually gone in and I've started putting another line of oak trees, and I'm going to do a double row to kind of separate out oak, food plot, oak, and then my plan is for the bottom is to put in more thermal cover. So come back in with more of a conifer type or a very dense planting, because I know the deer are already using that as a runway. It's a natural corridor between two bigger chunks of timber.
What I recommend to people first is, like you said, get a soil test. You got to know where your soil's at, and then that's kind of your building block. That's where you start. So for us, just because we're at a low pH, we're relatively acidic, doesn't mean we just turn around and leave it, knowing we can't, plant certain things. But we do a lot of soil building with fertilizer, lime. Lime is what actually raises that pH and gets it around, which ideal probably like 6 to 6.5, 6.6 is about perfect for what people want to plant for a food plot.
When it comes to soil tests, the one thing I would say is contact your local extension office. They can point you to the testing services, and you'll go around and you'll just take samples from all over my food plot. Or what I'm going to do is probably take 5 to 10 samples, mix them into a bag, and talk to my extension service and send it off to a lab and tell them, look, I want to have this for a food plot, so I'm going to be growing agronomic crops, small grains, maybe some clovers, and they will send you back the recommendations on liming and then on fertilization if you need to go that route. But
yeah, and that price is only $20.
It's not much.
I mean, it's $20 for something, so you're like, oh, it's another 20 bucks, but $20 is the building block for something that, I mean, it depends on what kind of prep work you got to do. Of course, a food plot like this, where you're kind of starting, I don't want to say from nothing, but got a lot of stumps. You're, you don't have full trees here, but you got close to it. It's a huge investment.
We're going to start the process of flagging out this food plot. We're going to go, we'll walk down a ways. We have not kind of walked this before with Colter, so I want to give him a chance. We'll flag as we go, and we're going to walk down till we find about an acre and a half worth of ground. This is going to be a fairly long and linear food plot. I don't want just a big square. I would like long linear. The deer will naturally feed down from one end to the other.
Yeah, and that I mean, obviously you're somewhat limited by what you have available. I mean, he's doing a long linear one here because, well, that's what this lays out. But as a general rule, deer, turkeys, grouse love edge. They're edge creatures. So the more edge you can have in your food plot, the better.
I also want to be careful that I don't have a lot of erosion. So I've picked a site that has a little bit of a slope to it, but nothing too great that I'll get a lot of erosion, knowing that this is more likely going to be initially as an annual crop.
Yep.
And then longer term, this will be my clover plot.
That you'll have that vegetation.
That'll have the vegetation to hold that. So let's go up here. We'll just start flagging along.
So you can see here, we're just following the natural features. So above us here is a pretty big slope that logistically for dozer work, for future tractor work, probably couldn't plant that, and then also you'd probably have some erosion issues on this hillside. So it seems simple flagging, right? But when you have a contractor come in, which if you don't have the equipment available to you, you want it to be pretty clear, because sometimes you can't be on site. The contractor just has a day or two to get the job done for you. So flagging, as simple as it is, it's good to have more flagging, or if you use paint than not, because it'll make it easier for the contractor and hopefully gets the job done the way you wanted it and intended to.